Okay, Tim, this is your fifth report that you're doing, the report in South Africa.
It's fifth time I've launched it in South Africa.
So, great. Yeah. Good. Well, nice to have you back here again. Sorry about the weather, but it will improve.
On a clear day, you could see Table Mountain, but not today.
Not today, but that's fine. And I really wanted to understand, first of all, what was your overarching feeling of the tasting this time? Because it's been such an odd couple of years. And how did it feel this time?
I mean, relief to be back, because I think that I'm sure you felt the same way, that you can only do so many Zoom tastings and so many Zoom calls before you start to pull your hair out, really. Absolutely. I mean, thank goodness that Zoom existed and we can still do it. And I did 2 reports virtually. And the only good thing about that was that I could do it, but also that I knew the winemakers in advance, and therefore it makes Zoom slightly easier and less distancing. This year was great. It was great to be back. It made me realise how much I love this country, but also I was really surprised. I thought I'd get back and everything would be a bit in the doldrums, after the lockdowns and the semi-prohibitions and the export bans and all that stuff. And I thought a lot of wineries would have shut their doors. And instead of which, new places are opening up. I think something like there've been 18 mergers and acquisitions and sorts of things have gone on. But in terms of people actually closing their doors, nobody I know of has closed their doors, which is a great thing. So I found it surprisingly positive.
That's great. That's great to hear. I mean, one of the things that you often speak about is the sort of lack of self-confidence that we have as South Africans, we're sort of self-deprecating and that kind of thing. And how's that feeling now after the whole promo of South African wine during lockdown and the prohibition that we've been through? Is that feeling a bit different now?
Well, it's funny. The South Africans are a weird mix. I mean, I should know because I'm married to one, right? And I think that they're a kind of strange amalgam, if you like, of practicality. I think South Africans are very practical people, and we're talking, obviously about a huge number of people in the population, but generalising, are very good at dealing with problems and overcoming them. I think they're tenacious, South Africans, and I think that's a really good thing. I have said sometimes that I think South Africans don't realise in a way just how lucky they are to be living through this period in their history as a wine industry, because it's remarkable, and looking at it from outside you see that, and sometimes living inside the bubble, as it were, and we all suffer from this, you don't necessarily notice that. So I think maybe we're getting to the point where people are starting to say, hey, this stuff's pretty good actually, and maybe the 2 years of all that shit we went through has helped, that people have thought, hey, well, I'm going to appreciate this. I mean, I think we all thought that, because you just didn't know who's going to die, or, you nearest and dearest yourself. I mean, the beginning of it, we were all kind of we were putting newspapers in the oven to kind of get rid of of the germs and things like that. Yeah. So I think it's been so weird as a time. But no, I think there's a little bit more self-confidence creeping in, and I think that's a good thing. I really do.
I get the same feeling, I must say, from the industry, definitely.
Well, you would know, because you're on the ground, so you're seeing it day to day, whereas I just see it a month a year.
And I think something that I've noticed is that there seem to be, many of the producers are being much more focused on what they do, and kind of looking at their specific USP and going, this is what we do really well, and this is what we're going to focus on.
I think that's very true.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the other challenge that we've always had, and I think we'll still have for a while, is the pricing of the South African wine category, really. Yeah. Have you seen a shift in that in the UK in the last 2 years?
Yes, we have. I mean, which is a good
positive
thing.
Shift,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of wine is shipped in bulk still. 65% of South Africa's exports are bulk exports. Partly that can be explained by the lack of glass, and it was tricky to get hold of bottles and things like that, but it's still a fundamental problem that most South African wine is sold too cheaply, both in South Africa and also on export markets. But I think that premium export markets, of which the UK is one, people are starting to, they're not anymore thinking £40 is a lot of money for a South African wine, if it's a certain quality level. And I think that, like the wines we're going to taste today, 195 wines, those are the elite. And I think those elite producers are starting to get the prices they deserve. I mean, they're nothing compared with the prices that people get from California or Australia for some of their top wines, especially California, never mind France, Italy, etc. I think we're getting there. And in a sense, you have these kind of two markets. You have a cheap market, which is satisfying a public, and there's nothing wrong with that in a sense, but you almost get the elite, which is, it's like an enormous balloon really, that's sort of lifting the weight, if you like, off the ground, and the basket with the bulk wine in it is, I think, is slowly rising off the ground because of the size of this balloon. And I mean, hot air is a sort of bad analogy. It's not hot air, but the size of the balloon is sort of pulling the whole industry up, and it's difficult. I mean, these things take a long time. We all know that changing images of perceptions of things, it doesn't happen like that.
No, it takes time, but it does seem to be making inroads, definitely.
I think so. I mean, I think certainly wine cognoscenti or geeks, whatever you want to call them, wine lovers in England are very excited about the top South African wines. And you go to dinner parties and you go to tastings and you go to wine bars and or restaurants, and those wines are increasingly on the list. And you're seeing, the Carbielskloof and the Cristallums, obviously from Peter Allen and Duncan Savage's wines, and the Molyneux and Eben, obviously, and David and Nadia Sadi and Donovan Ryle. All of those wines have got successful markets. And it's interesting, if you look at Justerini and Brooks, who are a very posh importer and have taken over some of the agencies from Berry Brothers, and these are people who used to selling high-end Burgundy and Barolo and Bordeaux, and they're now taking on a lot of these top South African agencies and doing focus tastings in London of those top producers, aiming the wines at exactly those sorts of people, the sort of consumers who would buy those wines. Yeah.
Well, I think in no small way you've contributed enormously to that, I think. So thank you very much.
I mean, that's very nice of you to say so. And it's not really for me to say. I mean, I certainly believe very passionately in the wines. And, some people say to me, you're a cheerleader. I'm not a cheerleader. I'm a journalist who I think recognises quality, and I'm lucky enough that I've tasted all of the great wines of the world at some point in my life, just about.
That's pretty impressive.
And therefore, I can say, well, this is as good as that. And, I've tasted enough Bordeaux or Burgundy or Barolo or Brunello or whatever to say these belong in that category. And one of the points I made in the report this year is that, the best wines do belong in that elite grouping, really.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic to hear.
Well, I believe it,
it's good. And what advice do you have for new winemakers coming into the fold and kind of looking at this and aspiring to be, a number 95 and above?
Well, it's nice. I think there are six or seven producers whose wines are in today who've never had one in before, and some of them are producers who are quite well established who I've just never felt they were quite there. Yeah. But there's at least one. Which I'm tasting I tasted for the first time, which was the Off the Record Syrah. I don't know if you've had that.
It rings a bell, but I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, try it upstairs, which is a Ceres Plateau Syrah, and I tasted that, and I just thought, this is mind blowing. So I go 95. Yeah. So it does. You can make that elite. The advice I would give is it's a lot of hard work. The barrier to entry in this country is low because the price of grapes is comparatively low. You can start a brand. With a bit of rented cellar space and a few tons of Chenin Blanc. The difficult bit is always selling it. And my advice to people is think about who you're going to sell the wine to, how you're going to sell it, and that bit you talked about earlier about focusing on something. So instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to make 20 different wines, if you're Peter Walter, fine, you can sell 50 different wines, but blank bottle. But not many people have got Peter's creativity. And I think if I were a young producer going into it, I'd look at making a small number of wines. Start small with volume you can sell. Think about an export market or a domestic market. I mean, thank goodness the domestic market is back because a lot of those wines are sold through the on-trade. Yes. And that collapsing during COVID, I think, hit a lot of people very hard. So I just think about where you're going to sell the wine before you make it would be my strongest bit of advice. Yeah,
good advice. I've discovered recently that I really like Cinsault. Yeah. And there's not a hell of a lot of it, but what do you think is the future of Cinsault in South Africa?
Really exciting. I mean, I was talking to Alex Milner, from Nati Fallet, and he started this thing called the Cinsault Collective, I think. And I can't remember when he started, but it was quite comparatively recently. I think it's 2014 or 15. And he said that he showed I think he made 2 or 3 wines to start with, and he showed them to his brother. And his brother said, you can sell this stuff? And that's only, that's less than a decade ago. Yeah. And suddenly Cinsault has become quite exciting, because of people like obviously Eben and Duncan and Donovan Ryle who are making incredible Cinsauts. It's a comparatively old Cape variety. It has a history, I mean, more possibly as a blended variety than as a standalone variety. It's obviously one of the parents of Pinotage. I think it's a very strong category, and I think also the world generally, but South Africa too, is moving away from big, rich, oaky, 15.5% alcohol wines to something that's lighter, easier to serve with food or to drink with food, and Cinsault fits the bill. I mean, you know, sometimes it's a bit simple, but at its best, and I think a lot of those are old vine project wines, where you've got these old Cinsault vines, and you don't have old Cabernet or old Cabernet Franc or old Syrah for various reasons, whether it be virus or the fact that the grape variety wasn't imported to the Cape. Cinsault is a strong card in that sense, you know, that it stands alongside Chenin, really. It's almost the Cape counterpoint to Chenin, you know, different colours and different styles, obviously, but I think you've got those old vines in the ground. I mean, the oldest red wine vineyard in South Africa is Cinsault, you know, is
that's the 1900 one, huh?
1900, yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, which is that Wellington vineyard, the you know, the Mulligan.
122 years old.
Yeah, I mean, that's
pretty
amazing,
impressive.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Where I'm sitting, age 61, that's twice my age.
I mean, the tasting that you did this year, you tasted, I believe, 2,228 wines. It's bloody impressive.
And sometimes it felt like that.
And the percentage of wines that hit the 95 and above?
I think it was just over 8%.
I think you said, which is amazing. And the tasting that we're going to be at today is going to be every single one of those 195 wines.
Every single wine is there.
Incredible.
I hope people won't try and taste all 195.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go for the Cinsault. Looking at the Cape Winemakers Guild and the protégés, and are there any particular ones that stand out there for you that you think you really want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most successful protégé so far has been Rutger van Veek, you know, who's obviously making the wines at Stark Conde. He's not here today because he's on a flight to the States, but his boss, Jose Conde, is here, and I had dinner with him last night. And I think he's sort of an inspiration. But it's amazing if you look at the protégés. I think there are 18 of them now, in either senior winemaking positions or running their own brands. And one of the points I make in the report was about transformation, and I think a lot of us have been a bit frustrated and said, come on, this could go a bit faster. But you can't rush these things, you know, you can't rush winemaking experience, you can't rush tasting experience. And I think what's really exciting is seeing how many winemakers of colour are coming through, and a lot of them are, you know, they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and I think they're going to transform the industry over the next 20 years. And I think that's really exciting, and I think it's almost, to me, the most impressive thing the Cape Winemakers Guild has done. They've made some great wines and the auction's fine, but I think the protégé thing
is a huge game changer.
Is a massive game changer, you know, because these guys who are, you know, Elsenburg graduates or you know, Stellenbosch University graduates, they come out and suddenly they've got 3 years, you know, separate years working with top winemakers. And being paid, you know, it's not just
a real proper
where
job.
they say come and do this and we'll exploit you for a year. It's a proper job. And talking to them last night, you know, I had dinner with a dozen, you know, winemakers of colour, of whom I think 7 were protégés, and they were all very, very positive about the whole protégé thing and what it had given them, but also how it had kind of accelerated their careers. So, you know, well done, Cape Winemakers Guild. I think it's to me, it's enormously positive. I think it's one of the most positive things. And I went to the Wine Arc this year, you know, which opened last year in November.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about
that. And I thought
that.
the Wine Arc, again, great. You know, these brands have finally got a home, and it's not just a kind of shack somewhere. It's something that looks really stylish. And I think part of the problem that a lot of black-owned brands have had in the past is that people didn't take them seriously. And sometimes I think they were right not to take them seriously because the wines sometimes were not very good. And you know, and you don't sell a wine just on the fact that it's black. And even the winemakers and the owners, and you know, people like Denise Stubbs at Tokozani, she says no one's going to buy wine because it's black. You know, or they might buy it once. But if the wine's no good, they're not going to come back. And I think we've moved to a point now where we've got critical mass. And the quality of the wines that have been made by the top, you know, black winemakers, or I can put it that way, and the black-owned brands is finally kind of taking off. And there have been people, obviously, like Carmen Stevens and Intiki Bayela, who've been doing good stuff for some time at a much higher level. But I think now you're getting to the point where, you know, we're eventually going to have 30 black brands which are really, really good. And I think we were talking about this last night. eventually I think we won't even comment on it.
Yeah.
It won't even be worth mentioning.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't have to say, hey, this is a black winemaker. You just
Yeah.
say, yeah, hey, you know. I mean, I think there are something like, you know, 50 or 60 black winemakers now in the country who are assistant winemakers or winemakers out of 940 odd in the country. I mean, that's not
small,
enough,
but
that's a hell of a lot better than it was 10 years
Yeah,
ago, let
absolutely.
alone 20 years ago
Yeah.
or 30 years ago,
Yeah.
when the idea of a black winemaker, you know,
Was
I mean,
unheard of.
might have been somebody working in the cellar room, you know, sorry, in the tasting room or in the cellar, but the idea of somebody bringing you, you know, to their winery and saying, this is our winemaker, it just wouldn't have happened. You know, I mean, you know that as well as I would.
Yeah. I mean, how many black-owned brands are there in your 195 wines that we're tasting today?
That's a good question. I don't think there are any actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yet.
Well, that's a
I mean,
good goal.
but there
know?
are certainly wines with black winemakers.
Sure.
So
yeah.
you know, Rudke has
and I think on that side,
and also, you know, one of the wines that's won my red wine, the value red wine of the year, which is from Brookdale.
Okay.
Chiara Scott is the winemaker,
Yes.
so she's obviously a young black winemaker, and my viticulturist of the year, Shelton Van Veek, is also a black viticulturist. So,
Yeah, that's
so like, you know,
wonderful, yeah.
I wasn't doing it as a form of tokenism.
No.
I gave it because
was-
their wines deserve it.
Yeah.
But I think that's just the kind of tip of an iceberg, if I can put it that way, or, you know, it's just tip of the pyramid really. And I think that this I'm mixing metaphors, but, you know, the pyramid is moving upwards, if the pyramid can do that. But you know what I mean? Maybe the pyramid is just sort of narrow.
Going up with a hot air
Maybe
balloon.
it's
Yeah.
narrowing slightly.
Yeah.
So instead of having this broad base of stuff
Yeah,
that's not
it's
very
sort of-
good, it's slowly
cylindric.
doing that, and,
Yes.
and it's pushing the peak up.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'd like to think that in, I don't know, 5 years' time, that you know, Wade Sanders wines will be there,
Yeah.
that Natasha Williams wines
Yeah.
will be there, that you know, Benelli's wines will be there,
Absolutely.
and I think all of these guys have got potential because they're all outstanding winemakers.
Yeah.
They just need a few more years.
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think to finish off, Tim, what do you think the characteristics are? Is there a golden thread that runs through all of the 195 wines that are 95 and above? What is that thing?
I mean, that I like them, obviously, but that's self-evident, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if it's funny that, I mean, I suppose this was somebody else to say, but if I were to try and describe my own palate, you know, I tend to like things with freshness that are acid driven. That sounds horrible, doesn't it? But you know what I mean? Where they're balanced and nuanced. Sometimes they express place or a series of places and soil type. That they're not winemaker wines, where you don't get a sense that you can see the winemaker's sticky thumbprints all over them. That the wines that I choose, and some of them are traditional in style, and some of them are bigger in style and bolder in style. But I think the thread would be freshness, balance, nuance, elegance, expression. You know, expression of place and South Africanness. You know, and I think if you look back 10 years ago, how many trump cards does South Africa have? Well, you might have said Pinotage and you might have said Chenin Blanc, and now there are like dozens of trump cards, you know, and you've mentioned Cinsault, obviously Stellenbosch is very strong, but I think who would have seen where Syrah has got to, you know, even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, Syrah is one of the most successful categories in my report. The quality of those wines, no one can do that. You know, I mean, I think even the Northern Rhone, if you put some of those wines, you know, from the Molyneux or from Lucas van Logrenberg or Damascene, you know, another new producer in the top 95, so you put those up there against the best wines of Hermitage and Cornas and Côte, they'd look pretty smart, you know. So it's great, you know, and I think we're both very lucky that we've had a ringside seat, as it were, or front row seat, to watch all this stuff evolving, and it's, you know, it's very moving to me. Actually, I mean, I just walked in the door and I thought, God, my first report, 2013, it was 80 pages long, and I reviewed 700 wines. I remember it coming out, and some people said, "Who's this guy?" You know. Never mind, they've been coming here already for 20 years, and I knew the region pretty well. But you know, it was a shot in the dark, step in the dark, if you like. And today, here we are, 195 wines. I've just published a report, 316 pages. It's nearly 100,000 words long. I mean, that's longer than a lot of novels, you know. And it feels like it, believe me. But I just think that's amazing. You know, I'm not saying well done me. I'm saying well done
as a country,
as a country. Yeah. You know, and it would be nice sometimes, instead of people moaning about, you know, me or South African wine, or saying it doesn't deserve to be that, and the old cultural cringe.
Yeah.
People actually celebrated it.
Yeah.
You know, the way they do the Springboks winning a test against New Zealand or Australia. You know?
Well, I was going to say that about the New Zealand one, but I mean,
you know, when you
the confidence is here now.
You blitz, you know, Australia last weekend, and people are out on the streets, you know, black, white, you know, just male, female, you know, straight, gay, lesbian, whatever, just saying, go South Africa. And I think that's a brilliant thing.
Yeah,
you know.
It's wonderful. I really want to thank you for all the work that you do. I think just as a category, it's phenomenal. So thank you very much for that.
I mean, thank you for thanking me, but you don't have to. I mean, it's it's a pleasure to do it. And every year, you know, I just think, God, this is so good. You know, I'm sorry there are 195 wines for those of you who were at the tasting, but there we go.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.